Okay, everybody, here we go. The title of this presentation is Polyolefins 2008, a year of transition. After 4 years of strong growth and really high operating rates, the polyethylene and polypropylene markets will experience a real dramatic shift on a global scale. They will, during 2008, actually make the transition from a seller's market to a buyer's market. Now, this change in market dynamics will be caused primarily by a massive build of polyethylene and polypropylene capacity in both the Middle East and in Northeast Asia. For the first time, the Middle East will enter the global markets as a really potent force in polypropylene and go from being a net importer to being the premier, the #1 net exporter in the space of a very few short years. And let me say this, the problems, any possible problems in Iran or possible delays in some projects in the Middle East or Asia will not stop the process that I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of minutes. But what do we mean by a seller's market? Well, in polyolefins, the seller's market is usually characterized by a couple of things, like increasing prices and margins for the producers. Also, availabilities become limited, and we experienced that particularly in the summer of this year. Market share becomes less important, and fighting with market share becomes less important. Discounts or rebates decrease, and there tends to be a concentration on higher margin products on the part of the resin producers. And in general, there's less competition on a global scale. Now, what we're going to be transforming into, and it's going to start in 2008, is a buyer's market. This will start, got to move to the next slide. Thank you. A buyer's market. Yes, indeed. This is going to start in 2008, but will gain momentum in 2009. And it is characterized by decreasing in prices and margins for the resin producers. Suddenly, all grades of product become available. There's more of a let's make a deal attitude or mentality on the part of the resin suppliers. Volumes become more important than margins. Fierce competition arises, and we also tend to see more imports. Well, the question is, what drives polymer prices? That's always a good question. Well, many factors do. Polymer prices are basically determined by cost push from the cost of ethylene or propylene, which makes up between 80 and 90% of the total cost of production of PE and PP, depending on the process. The variable cost of production for producing PE and PP will set the floor price. Prices will not go lower than that because then people stop producing. But upwards, on the other hand, there's no real limit in the short term. It's basically what the market can bear. If demand is larger than supply, prices will go up until plastics converters stop buying and equilibrium is reached. We experienced this in the first 9 months of 2007. Now let's look at some of those supply and demand factors that we can expect in the near future. Let's look at polyethylene first. Global demand for polyethylene approached 66 million metric tons, actually 68 million metric tons in 2007. So, as you can see here, film and sheet represent the largest end-use application for PE with nearly 50% of the total. Now this slide here shows the fact very clearly over here, the Northeast Asia is driving demand. Polyethylene demand growth is being driven by Northeast Asia, and particularly China, with a consumption of 18.6 million tons in 2007. It's already the world's largest market. Of course, much of this consumption in China is used to produce products for export. The second largest market is North America with a total demand of 16.2 million tons. Now, as can be seen here on this chart, PE demand in China is going to grow by about 8.3 million tons by 2012. Now let's look at production capacity growth for polyethylene. As can be readily seen in this chart, Northeast Asia will be adding quite a bit of capacity on its own to meet the growing demand, going from 6.5 million tons in 2008 to to 22.8 million tons in 2012. But China will not be able to produce all of the polyethylene it will consume, and much of the shortfall will have to be met by the Middle East. Nevertheless, I want to really stress the fact that China by no means will be able to absorb all of the 10.3 million additional tons expected in the Middle East in the next 5 years. Now, the Middle East, since the Middle East producers will always produce, even at the bottom of the cycle, even when product is in oversupply worldwide, the product will have to find another home. Now, you ask yourself, well, why will the Middle East producer keep producing even if we're in a down cycle, at the bottom of the cycle? Basically, the Middle East producer will produce because the ethylene production costs there are so low. Ethylene production in the Middle East is based primarily on ethane, and the price of ethane is fixed. On this graph, this red line here, we show the cost advantage of the Middle East producer compared to the producer in Western Europe. Now you can see here, and it even takes in the cost of freight and packaging. You can see here that in October of 2007, the cost advantage of the Middle East producer compared to the West European producer was a whopping $800 per metric ton. So, and when you have a cost advantage like that, or an additional margin like that, you're going to keep producing no matter what. And you know what? The higher the oil price, the bigger the cost advantage becomes. Ta-da! So let's look here at where the capacity is being built in the Middle East. And we can see, as a region, the Middle East will account for approximately 10 million tons of new production capacity in the next 5 years. And of this, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will account for about 53%, and Iran for about 23%. You know, a lot of people have speculated about potential delays associated with the projects in Iran. Our view is that while projects may be delayed, most of the new capacity in Iran will certainly be online by 2012 and will contribute to the global oversupply situation by that year. So what we're seeing here is, indeed, it's a mountain of polyethylene capacity being built in the Middle East and in Asia. And you can see here in this bar, 2008 is relatively low with only about 3 million tons coming on stream worldwide. But look what happens in 2009. We take a big jump. And you can see here also in the yellow, that's the Middle East and Africa, and here on the top, that's the Asia Pacific. That's what most capacity is being built. Very little new capacity being built in North America and Europe, and that's basically debottlenecking and capacity creep. So what's going to be the impact of all this? Well, we can see here, since China is the market that everybody's producing this capacity to export to, what we see here is basically the pink line, or the yellow line first. That's Chinese polyethylene capacity. And just by coincidence, the amount of expected Middle Eastern imports is tracking on the same line. That's really coincidental. The red bars here are what China needs to import to meet their shortfall from what they can't produce themselves. And what the blue bars here below the line, that is even if the Middle East would export all of their polyethylene to China, there would still be this much volume, 4 to 6 million tons of additional capacity that China could not import. So this is what, even if the Middle East can export 100%. What that means is that, and that's not even realistic, because there are a lot of countries in the region like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Thailand, and even Malaysia, that depend on exports of polyethylene into China. So actually a more realistic figure would be about 50%.